an event that fundamentally changes the security architecture of Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron will announce his country's nuclear doctrine as early as Monday, March 2nd, outlining what Paris can offer to allies who are concerned about the reliability of the US nuclear umbrella under President Donald Trump. The point is that Europe, led by Macron, is striving to become independent in the field of nuclear deterrence. And Macron tells Europeans directly that the French are the only ones in Europe who have their own nuclear weapons and, importantly, the technology and capability to produce them. Therefore, the French could cover all of Europe with their nuclear umbrella instead of the Americans. And at the same time, analysts from the British Defence Centre RUSI concluded that British and French nuclear missiles may lose their ability to overcome Russian defences as early as 2035. But this conclusion actually highlights the need for the measures that Emmanuel Macron is now proposing in the nuclear sphere. My name is Alexi Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel. Pecci News, the link is in the description to this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, Reuters reports that the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, will update his country's nuclear doctrine as early as Monday, March 2nd, outlining what Paris can offer its allies as a joint nuclear umbrella without the involvement of the US. I should note that it was expected that Macron would make this statement at the Munich Security Conference, but this proposal was postponed, and I'll explain why a bit later. Although France and the United Kingdom are nuclear powers, most European countries primarily rely on America to deter any potential adversaries. This has been the established foundation of transatlantic security for decades. But Donald Trump's approach to Russia and his tougher stance toward traditional allies, including, for example, threats to seize Greenland, an autonomous territory, and the territory of a NATO ally, namely Denmark, have unsettled European governments. To put it mildly, they've unsettled them. Earlier this month in Munich, at that very same security conference, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that Berlin had begun talks with France about a potential European nuclear deterrent, which, according to Macron, should be a comprehensive approach to defense and security. Other states, including traditionally pro-American countries in Northern Europe, have so far cautiously expressed interest in Macron's proposal. But what's interesting is that it is no longer being rejected because many of Macron's earlier proposals from the period between 2017 and 2020 were rejected. Well, for example, Macron, let me remind you, even during Donald Trump's first term, talked about the fact that Europeans, we need strategic autonomy, we need to become strong independently, without the Americans, without the Russians, without the Chinese, without anyone. We ourselves must be strategically autonomous, economically and militarily. Macron even suggested back then that a European army should be created because the Americans might let us down. People like Trump. Back then, people dismissed Macron, saying this Frenchman was suggesting something ridiculous and not worth hearing. In 2020, he also proposed a nuclear umbrella. He said, let's think about this. We have nuclear weapons, the British have them, let's come up with our own nuclear umbrella over all of Europe. Without the Americans, we will continue to be friends with the Americans, but we need to defend ourselves. Back then, Macron was also brushed off, but now at least there is some interest being shown. And now European officials are privately questioning how much France's nuclear arsenal can actually protect the continent. Among the concerns are the distribution of expenses and the question of who will control the decision to launch. And does focusing on nuclear forces risk pushing out the necessary investments in conventional armed forces? I would note that France officially spends about $6 billion a year to maintain its arsenal of 290 nuclear warheads, which is the fourth largest arsenal in the world. And here I will quote Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. If Europe truly wants to act independently, it must create its own nuclear capability. This will cost billions of euros and you will lose the greatest guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella. So Rutte is discouraging this idea. According to experts, as part of NATO's nuclear deterrence, the United States has deployed a total of about 100 nuclear bombs in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. In the event of a conflict, the air forces of these non-nuclear countries will carry American bombs in accordance with the so-called nuclear sharing doctrine. This month, U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Elbridge Colby told allies in Brussels that Washington will continue to extend its nuclear deterrence to all of Europe, even though it is investing more than $1 trillion in modernizing its own arsenal. They say that yes, Trump is making a political statement, but nuclear deterrence isn't going anywhere. French officials state that Paris is not seeking to replace American protection or compete with NATO. According to French officials, Paris wants Europeans to better understand what France's doctrine can and cannot provide. But Paris is firmly convinced that funding deterrence capabilities remains exclusively France's responsibility in order to ensure national control. That is, the French are saying directly, we're not asking you for money, don't think we're trying to shift the burden of maintenance onto everyone else. The main element of France's position is strategic ambiguity about when nuclear weapons might be used and where Paris's interests intersect with broader European defense. But there's also a rather curious point here. Any expansion of France's role would also require Europe to develop deep strike missiles with a range of more than 2,000 kilometers. This is a capability that Europe does not have yet. The development of tactical nuclear weapons, intended for use on the battlefield as opposed to strategic weapons designed for long-range launches, is considered even less likely. Officials say this would raise concerns under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has long been supported by European governments. That's funny. So, just imagine the Russians deploy their nuclear weapons in Belarus, closer to Europe, and the Europeans say, oh, but we have the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. What are you doing? We might provoke someone. But next, I'll quote the main diplomat of the European Union, Kaja Kallas. We understand where these discussions come from. They stem from the fact that our transatlantic alliance is no longer what it used to be. My personal opinion is that if there is more nuclear weapons in the world, I don't think we will live in a more peaceful world. But the announcement that Macron is preparing is already being called Macron's nuclear doctrine. At the base of France's nuclear submarines in Brittany, Macron will deliver the traditional nuclear doctrine report that is customary for every presidential term. And according to this doctrine, France's position is to maintain a minimal but reliable arsenal capable of inflicting such serious damage as to deter any first strike. But Macron decided to discuss some alternatives this year. French officials noted that the strategic situation has changed dramatically since his last speech in 2020. Citing the expansion of Russia's arsenal and the increase in nuclear rhetoric after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, France has long stated that its vital interests have a European dimension, meaning they are not limited to France alone. Back in 2020, Macron invited partners to strategic discussions. This proposal did not generate much enthusiasm at the time. This is what I was talking about, that he proposed this idea 6 years ago. Officials say that one principle of the doctrine remains unchanged. Only the President of France can give the order for a nuclear strike, and that's how it is. British analysts claim that British and French nuclear missiles may lose the ability to overcome Russian defenses as early as 2035. They say that in almost 10 years, the Russians will have developed such air and missile defense systems that British and French nuclear missiles won't be able to break through them. But if the situation in Europe remains as it is today, then Macron's nuclear doctrine is more relevant than ever. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially. I would be grateful for that. You can do this by sending any donation or by getting a paid subscription using the links and details in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.